For more on the international fallout from the war in the Middle East, let's bring in NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons, who just sat down with the UK's top diplomat. Keir, what'd you find out?
Well, Willie, I've been speaking to diplomats across the region through the week and here in the UK. And this was an interview with Britain's Foreign Secretary. And I would just describe the various positions really quite simply as this. I've been listening to the conversation you guys have been having over the past hour with Richard Engel and Richard Haas and the spokesperson for the IDF. Fascinating. I'll just lay it out like this. There is a large tranche of countries, Turkey, Jordan, many in the region, Arab states, saying there should be an immediate ceasefire, that the civilian casualties are simply too much to bear. There's that side. Then there is the US and the UK and some of its allies and partners, which are basically calling for that, and they use the language very carefully, humanitarian pause, temporary, localized. That is specifically about trying to get aid in and hostages out. There is a school of thought among some countries in the Gulf, for example, that if you do that, if you have those negotiations, maybe you inch your way to trust, and that is a way to try and get towards more of a pause, if you want to put it that way, get towards diplomacy, if you like, kind of, less war, more jaw, as someone once said. But then what you're hearing publicly from diplomats in the US and, of course, here in the UK, and you're about to hear the Foreign Secretary, what you're hearing publicly from them, and keep in mind the UK's policy is very close to the US, is trying to balance this continuing support for Israel with concerns about civilians. Take a listen.
We are backing a nation's right to counter terrorism, but whilst doing so, we are absolutely committed to the rule of law. We raise this. We are absolutely committed to the preservation of civilian life, and we work towards that. We will continue to push for what we believe to be in the best interest of evacuating those foreign nationals, including British nationals, from Gaza, and to get really meaningful amounts of humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people in Gaza who deserve it, without those humanitarian resources being stolen by Hamas.
The criticism right now, of course, from countries like Jordan, remember a very important partner to the US, countries like Turkey, a member of NATO, is that actually that's untenable, that this is war, that civilians are dying inevitably in such a crowded place like Gaza, and to kind of try and say we support Israel, but we don't believe in civilian casualties, or we want to try and minimize those, that's just stretching diplomacy beyond its capability, if you like.
Yeah, Keir, talk about the split between what we have, the Prime Minister, who's been very supportive of Israel, but also an anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian electorate in Britain. And I've seen it as a tourist to London for years, even when there aren't any hot button issues going on in the Middle East. I've seen pro-Palestinian parades and anti-Israel parades going on, and they've been quite energetic. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we should say demonstrations, protests aren't necessarily a reflection of the majority view in a country, but you're right, there is that division. You're seeing it there in the US, Joe, here in the UK too, particularly on the left, among the left wing, the Liberals, divided over their view about Israel and the Palestinians. It's very interesting. There's a kind of, deep politics here in the weeds, but the Labour Party, that very well may win the election next year and become the government, deeply split over what is the right approach. And the leader, Keir Starmer, my namesake, Keir Starmer, he's struggling to manage that while trying to still win an election and become Prime Minister. But there's something more profound here, Joe, I think, and I think it's really important to try and tease it out. And I've been listening to you guys over the last hour, and it's something I'd add to the conversation. And that is this, that prior to October 7th, there was a agreement, a deal, a kind of understanding that you could have stability in the region and at the same time isolate Hamas. keep the Palestinians in Gaza and put that to one side. The countries that agreed with that signed up to that, if you like, perhaps not physically, but in principle, Jordan, UAE, Qatar, Britain, the US, Israel, maybe you could even argue the Palestinian Authority. That idea, that what's happened is that idea that you can have stability without addressing the Palestinian question, well, that is now under serious question, under serious scrutiny. That's to understate it. And I think one of the really big questions for Secretary Blinken and all of the diplomats involved in this, and you've been touching on it, is what comes next? What is the deal that comes next? What the Israelis are saying is we have to wipe out Hamas. You've said already that seems a incredibly difficult thing to try to achieve, particularly given the civilian casualties. So what does stability in the region look like after all this is over? No one seems to really be addressing that, and yet that is probably the most important question in all of this, aside from, of course, the bloodshed and the instability and the concerns for the region right now.